Inktense pencils are a wonderful versatile medium that I really highly recommend for beginners and for more experienced artists. Inktense pencils come in 100 colours. They've just added another 28 to the range this year. Now, in this video, I'm going to be showing you why I think you don't actually need 100 colours to be painting confidently nature subjects in Derwent Inktense. And I've put together a list of 12 and 24 recommended colours that you can use to begin your Inktense journey, get used to these pencils, and you can perhaps supplement these colours later on if you really feel you need to. But I think that for painting nature subjects and landscapes, this 24 is the colours that you're going to need to do that successfully. Now, when I first got the Derwent Inktense for myself, I had the 36 set, which I have swatched out here in this sketchbook. And I looked at the lists to find out what you get in these smaller sets, and I find that particularly some of these greens that you get, for example, this very bluish teal green, and this extremely strong luminescent apple green aren't necessarily the greens that I would really recommend to be using if you are quick sketching out in the field. And especially if you like doing botanical subjects, such as these, I just feel that you need a different set of colours to really do this quickly and efficiently without having to do too much mixing on top. So I've really studied this in quite some detail over the last kind of couple of months, and I have been going through the entire range of the 100 colours that are available and swatching them out in this sketchbook. So this is kind of the background research that I did to get to these recommended colours. Now I'm going to tell you the recommended 12 first, and then I'll give you some of the reasons that I chose those particular 12. And then we'll go on to the 24, and I'll give you the reasons why I chose the 24. This is part of my upcoming course, Painting Nature in Derwent Inktense, and that is loading onto my Patreon now and will be on my website soon. These recommended colours are the third video that comes up in that course, and this is kind of an extended version of that. So I'm just going to go into way more detail about why I choose these colours and why I think that they are a good match for nature painters. In the rest of the course, I talk about techniques and exercises for getting used to Derwent Inktense. So if you're new to this medium, go and have a look at the course. Details are in the description below the video. Now let's get on to it. I have put the 12 colours up on this side, and they'll be coming up on your screen now. My recommended colours to buy if you want 12 Inktense pencils to get started with are Payne's Grey, Tan, Ionian Green, Burnt Umber, Charcoal Grey, Iris Blue, Fuchsia, Sherbet Lemon, Persian Red, Shiraz, Felt Green, and Tangerine. And you can see down here the kind of range of colours that you can get. This is not every single possible combination of these 12 colours, but it does give you an idea of the range of colours that you can get with these 12. Right, now in the actual 12 set for the Inktense that you can get in the shops, rather than the Sherbet Lemon, they actually give you this sun yellow. And I find personally that looking back here, these are the two colours. I mean, there's not a lot in it, but when it comes to mixing, this Sherbet Lemon one is the most versatile. Generally, when you're working with watercolours, it's quite good to have a nice lemony yellow in your palette. It can help you to get to several of these oranges. So if you have a good lemony yellow and a good red, you can find your way to quite a few of these different oranges here that you can see on this side. So I recommend getting in that 12 set the Sherbet Lemon as your yellow. Now, as well as a bright yellow, it's always good to kind of have a ochre yellow, so something more towards the earth tones. And that's important because that will help you to get to these kind of colours down here, where if you're mixing together a little bit of a lemony yellow and a little bit of an earthy yellow, you can find your way to these slightly more golden colours. It also helps you when you come to your greens, so let's have a look at those. Yeah, mixing together some of the ochre colour with a blue as we're going to come to in a moment, will get you to these colours here. Now these are the earth tones here, and this is tan, so this is the one that I recommend in the 12 set. And when you mix that together with oak and with burnt umber, you get some really excellent lighter browns and yellows that you can use in kind of woodland settings and things like fungi, those sorts of things. So this is kind of the yellow ochre of the Inktense set, and it's a really good strong colour, so I really recommend that one. So we've got Sherbet Lemon, we've got Tan. The next one that's really worth looking at is Tangerine. And if we go back to these oranges here, you see that I've done a lot of colour mixing and testing between different reds and yellows to create oranges here. And most of these ones here can really be found within the reds and the yellows. But I find that this one, which is this Tangerine, is a really, really useful colour that is not so easy to find or to mix from the reds that are in the set. So it's always worthwhile to have a good orange in your set. And I think within the Inktense colours, the Tangerine is my favourite of the oranges. It mixes very well with the burnt umber to give you some intermediate browns, some reddish browns. It also will mix very well with your yellows to take you through to some of those nice oranges closer to the yellow side of the scale. So mixing this orange rather than a red in with your yellows will take you to some nice intermediate oranges between these two colours. So I really think Tangerine is a great one to have in the set. Now, in the 12 set from Inktense, they actually include Tangerine in there, and I think that was a really good choice. Now, for the reds, they included Poppy Red, which is a slightly different red from the one that I've included. This one, Persian Red, it came out in the latest colour set, so in the 28 that have just come out this year. And I recommend this one ahead of some of those other reds. Let's take a look at the reds, here we are. Because they're relatively similar. I think it's kind of a little bit closer towards an orangey scarlet than it is towards these darker reds, these sort of richer reds. But I chose this one because it's the only red that actually meets the light fastness scale. So when you look at light fastness, you're looking at museum conditions for 100 years. And so this is long-term exposure to light. And it's about the chemical stability of the pigments in your work. So how much will they fade? And reds are notoriously difficult to actually keep within a range that's going to last a long time under those sorts of conditions. So Persian red is the one that they've developed that is red, that is in the good section of that scale, to put things fairly simply. And unfortunately, I mean, this Tangerine is not with, it's got a low light fastness. So that one was difficult. But I found that the newer one that does have the higher light fastness, which is this orange sorbet, doesn't give you as much versatility in the orange as you get from the Tangerine. So there's a balance to be struck between light fastness and quality of mixing. But I find that this Persian red, it works very well to give you a nice range of colours. Here it is there with a darker red, and here it is over here with a brown. It can give you some nice intermediate colours in there. So Persian red for your red. Shiraz is the dark red, it's the maroon colour. Very, very useful to have this sort of colour in your palette. And it is omitted from the 12 set that Inktense recommend and sell. I personally always like to have this sort of colour. It crops up a lot in nature. I use it a lot in my paintings. So for stems like here, whenever you've got a kind of a reddish stem or a little bit of red within a plant, I find it easier to put in a little bit of a dark Shiraz colour than it is to try to mix something up from a brown and a red mixed together. So in terms of efficiency, having this sort of colour in your readily available palette is really, really useful. So that one there, Shiraz. So far we've got Sherbet Lemon, Tan, Tangerine, Shiraz and Persian red. Now I've taken the pencils and put them together here in this box. Let's open that. So we're talking this end of, if you see them laid out together in this set, they kind of make quite a lot of sense as an overall set. We've got tan over here in the earth tones, Sherbet lemon, tangerine, Persian red and Shiraz. Now let's talk a little bit about types of mixing now, because it's pretty important to have yourself a good magenta in your palette, and Derwent do include this colour, Fuchsia, in their recommended 12. Now, let's take a look at this. This is a mixing experiment I did quite a while ago, back in 2021, with some Inktense pencils. And you can see over here that I'm using Sun Yellow, which is slightly different yellow that I'm recommending in the 24 set, but prefer the Sherbet Lemon, this one, in the 12 set. The Fuchsia will combine with this yellow to find a primary red. So by mixing together the Fuchsia and your yellow into a scale here, you can find your reds in the middle. And again, Fuchsia going into your blue. This is Iris Blue, which I also recommend in this set. You can find your violet colours in here. And this is the CMY mixing scale. So this is like what printers use when they're mixing colour. We can emulate that with some good quality watercolour or ink pencils like these. And that's what I'm doing here. And that's why I included those in my recommendations. So we've got the Fuchsia here, and we've got this Iris Blue here, which is a sort of cerulean-y kind of blue. I find that this one is the most representative of a cyan in the set. I've done some mixing experiments with blues here, trying to find the ones that I prefer to use. Iris Blue back in this one. And it's been very interesting actually using them to mix some greens. So let's find the greens back in here. Here we go. I personally find that the 0900 mixes really well with the tan to give us these sorts of lovely ferny greens, but it also works very well to get some nice lime greens here. And this one, which I consider to be very close to the apple green, which is this one here. It can also be really useful to mix up some of these in here. So a couple of these experiments here, I think this one and this one were both mixed using the Iris Blue. So Iris Blue is really useful, really versatile blue, and great for mixing up some greens. Now, in their recommended 12, Derwent have this bright green here, this apple green, which as you can see is quite easy to mix up something very, very similar using the Sherbet Lemon and the Iris Blue. It also gives you this green, which is an incredibly bluish, vibrant green. Personally, I like to have neutral greens in a set, because I find that if I want to have a very bluey green or a very yellowy green, I can mix them when I've got two colours like this, just like you saw on these scales here. It's very easy to find something in between these two colours just by mixing them. You don't need to have a pencil really to do that, when you could have a more neutral and more useful green that you could just put on straight away. I am using felt green and Ionian green. These two greens are so handy for nature painting. So let's go back to this sketchbook. When I'm doing plants like this, I'm pretty much always relying on some combination of these two pencils and another one called Iron Green, which I'll come to in the 24 set, and my blues and yellows. I don't use many other of the greens in the Inktense set, because I find that as long as I've got the felt green and the Ionian green and a bit of a blue and a yellow, I can find my way to almost any other green here. And that includes these kinds of earthy greens as well, because if you use the ochre colour rather than the yellow, you can find your way to those, as I mentioned earlier. Ionian green is an excellent green if you are looking at backgrounds as well. It washes out beautifully. It can make things look very distant if you use it for distant cliffs or distant horizons. And it's also really good for painting the sea. If you combine Ionian green and iris blue together, sometimes including a bit of the Payne's grey here, you can get some very convincing seascapes just using these colours. In here, I use quite a lot of these in my seascapes, so let's have a look at this over here. This is a combination of the Payne's grey, which I've also used an awful lot in the sky, a bit of a leaf green, which can be, as I said there, mixed together from the tan and the blue, iris blue, and a little of the Ionian green. And all of these distant cliffs here have been done in that Ionian green, and a bit of this foliage here. Little bits like this. This is just a combination of those two colours, so the felt green and a bit of the Ionian green mottled together to give a really quick idea of dappled shade on close foliage. So as long as you've got these two greens and these two yellows and a decent blue, you can find your way to any particular green that you're looking for with a little bit of practice. Now let's finish off the 12 set. So Derwent, they recommend you to have these crazy greens, so teal green, apple green, and leaf green. This one, which is actually very useful, so we'll come to that one in a moment. But they don't include these two very useful colours here. Instead, yeah, they've got leaf green, and then they go straight on to baked earth, bark, which I haven't included here, and black. Now you'll see that when we get to the earthier tones within my recommended 12, I really don't bother with black. I haven't bothered with bark or baked earth here. What I've done is I put in the brand new burnt umber. Now it's taken until this year for Inktense to introduce the burnt umber into the pencils, and it's so useful. I mean, this is a very commonly known colour for artists to be using, so I don't know why it's taken this long, but as soon as one becomes available, it has to go into your palette. And bark is a very reddish, it's far less neutral, which makes it less useful, actually, because you can find bark by mixing together a Shiraz and a burnt umber anyway, and Shiraz is here. So if you mix these two together, which I think I've done one of these. No, I haven't. Okay, never mind. But if you mix these two together, you can find a colour a bit like this in between the two. Now, a word about black. I don't bother with black in the recommended 12 because it's quite rare that you're actually going to want to be using a black directly on your pictures. If you have dark tones, the best thing to do is to use a grey. So I've included two different greys here. Charcoal grey, which is closest to a black really. You see it can come up very dark. And Payne's grey, which was this wonderful stormy blue that artists everywhere are pretty mad about, to be honest. And these two mixed together make a wonderful green. And finally, if you actually mix together Payne's grey and burnt umber, you can get yourself to a really quite dark colour as well. So I don't bother with a black. I know Derwent do, but I think it's better to put yourself something in nice and neutral here and then mix yourself darker if you want to. So that's my recommended 12. Let's just go over them again. Payne's grey, tan, Ionian green, burnt umber, charcoal grey, iris blue, fuchsia, sherbet lemon, Persian red, Shiraz, felt green, and tangerine. Those are the 12 colours that I recommend that you'd go out and buy. Now, you can get on the Derwent website, you can get yourself a tin like this, or a tin of 12. And they'll give you a tin discount for buying them together. Or you can just buy the pencils separately and put them in a wrap or a container of your choice. So this is a 24 box from the Derwent website. You see it's kind of plain because you can pick any pencils you want to go into it. And now this is kind of an expanded range, okay? So we're going to go from that 12 and just expand that out. So what would you add to this if you wanted to buy a few more pencils? So not going quite as far as that 36, or certainly not as far as a 72 or 100, because look how much diversity of colour you can create just using these 24. I just want to point out here that back when I did this sketchbook, and if you haven't watched the video all about this sketchbook, by the way, go and check that out. I've put it at the end and in the description. I had the 36 set here, but when I go out, I was taking a small pencil wrap that could only hold maybe 12 to 15 of these. And a lot of these were being left at home all the time. So this is through years of taking this book out with me and experimenting and working on certain colours. So now that they've added a few more, I've had a little bit more to experiment and work with, but that's okay. And this is what I've come to. So let's go through the 24. I would also add sun yellow, hot red, violet, deep blue, iron green, spring green, leaf green, oak, baked turf, sepia ink, Indian ink, and ink black. Now, I believe that everything you actually need to go out in the field and to start painting and experimenting with these is within the 12 here. But expanding this out actually allows you a bigger range of colours, so increased versatility. But as well as that, it can increase your efficiency because you can take in colours that you would otherwise have to mix. It's speeding things up if you have a few more pencils to take out with you. So let's talk a little bit about some of these. Sun yellow is very close to sherbet lemon. So I actually find that sun yellow is a nicer yellow to use if you're just going to put down a yellow onto a plant. Things like the centres of daisies, it mixes very, very well with your tangerine to get you a nice orange. It's kind of a little bit closer to a cadmium yellow, whereas this one is closer to lemon yellow. Now, I wanted to include another red, one that's kind of closer to the sort of the cherrier, hotter colours. And hot red is one that is a compromise between the kind of the light fastness and the utility of the colour. I found that some of the other reds weren't as useful for making oranges. They kind of overpower everything, these ones through here. Whereas I found that the hot red was much more neutral than, say, like the chili red and the cherry here. So I include the hot red, although I really feel that that's kind of me personally. There wasn't very much in that. And as long as you've got a nice, reasonably light, fast, bright red, you should be able to find your way to one of these by adding a bit of this magenta colour. But I really like to have this one. I find it very useful. It's a good colour, but it's not so much a necessity as this, otherwise I would have put it into there. Now, talking of necessities, a good violet is really useful and important in your palette. You can find a violet in here between the fuchsia and the iris blue, but if you can just have a really good strong colour that just comes straight out the pencil, you get a much better effect. And this is very useful for when you're painting plants such as violets actually, or plants that are mostly pink, but you have a kind of a little bit of a bluishness to the shadows, and just little plants like this. This is a combination of Shiraz and violet, very useful. It's also great to kind of add a touch of shadow. So this is including, again, Shiraz and violet here on this bluish plant. So for plants in particular, having a good violet in your palette is really useful, really worthwhile. So I'll definitely include that. Also, I was scouring this set to find a colour that's close to an ultramarine. Now you can see here's a few experiments with some of the colours in the Inktense set and an ultramarine here, which is from the Winsor & Newton watercolour set. And I found that my closest one was this one, deep blue. And it's still a little bit off the ultramarine. Bright blue is another alternative, which is fairly close. So you could experiment a little bit between bright blue and deep blue. My choice personally is the deep blue, and that's what I use as a ultramarine substitute within Inktense. Now, moving along to our greens now. So although these are greens that can be mixed up using the colours that are in the 12 set, this is again about utility and efficiency when you're outside. You want to get a picture done quickly. You don't want to do quite so much mixing. I really recommend having these 3 colours in your outdoor set. So Iron Green is a nice bluish green, very useful alongside Ionian Green. Spring Green, well, it's a sap green, it's what it says on the tin really. It's a very, very useful springy colour. And I use it a lot in plants and plant leaves. But it's also one that you can kind of get to for a bit of mixing of your yellow and your felt green. And a leaf green to save some time with mixing your yellow ochre together with your blues. Just getting that colour straight out of the pencil. So again, this is a time-saving measure, but it's good to have these 3 in. Now we're just adding a few more earthy tones in. So we've already got the burnt umber, we've got tan over here. I just wanted a few more to kind of broaden out the earthy tones so I didn't have to mix when I'm outside. Oak is a very useful one. It's more of a neutral, a kind of natural brown kind of colour. It is a bit softer than burnt umber and a bit more orangey rather than reddy. We've got baked earth here, which is your red oxidey kind of colour, very useful to have that. And I actually prefer baked earth to the red oxide that's in the set. So we've got baked earth here, and this is a very strong red oxide. And I find it's a little bit too close to a red. For my liking, I prefer to have something like this, which is more of a terracotta kind of colour. It might be the environment that I live in, but I find this more useful. I don't see this coming up very often. I can get to something like that if I mix together the Shiraz together with the baked earth. So you can kind of find your way to that colour between these two if you want to. Now we're just getting into fairly obvious territory with ink, actually. I need a good sepia. I love a good sepia in my work, a good Indian ink, and finally a black. So I'm letting the black into my palette just because it's fairly useful sometimes, and because it's quite a nice one to paint with on its own if you want to do some monotone work. In fact, all 3 of these are wonderful, and the charcoal grey, actually, are wonderful for doing a bit of tonal study. Here's a few examples of that. This is a quick sketch that's only in charcoal grey, and this is experimenting a bit with bark. And then again, here is another sketch just using charcoal grey. So that's within that recommended 12 set. You can do quite a lot just using these as a single colour as a practice for developing your skills. And that's one of the things actually that I talk about in the Derwent Inktense course that I'm developing, Painting Nature in Derwent Inktense. That's loading up onto my Patreon now, and it's coming onto my website really soon. So do make sure that you're signed up to my mailing list if you want to receive more news about this course and mailing list discounts and things like that, or consider signing up to my Patreon and seeing it straight away. Now finally, I just want to take a little look at what's in Derwent's tin of 24. So they've also included Sherbet Lemon and Sun Yellow, Tangerine, again poppy red rather than Persian red, but that's because this one hadn't been developed yet with the increased light fastness, so we'll leave that out. We have chili red, which I chose hot red instead for that richer, kind of more cherryish red. They've included Shiraz and Fuchsia, which are here. They've also put in violet, which is a good choice, very useful. Iris blue, again, very useful. They chose the bright blue, which is the nice ultramarine variant, I suppose, variant on ultramarine. I chose deep blue instead there. Then they've included deep indigo and sea blue, which I haven't because I don't think you need many more blues after that point. Once you've got these two, you've got enough as far as I'm concerned. And that's me coming from a point of painting a lot of seas as well, right? I really think that as long as you've got these two and a Payne's grey, you're fine. You start mixing some greens and some browns in there, you've got seascapes and skies sorted. So I don't worry about having tons of blues. Teal green is a horrible bright colour and I wouldn't include that at all. I've gone for Ionian green and felt green instead. Now they include apple green, again very, very bright, probably too bright, and field green. Again, these colours are, I've put them back here. Field green here, teal green, apple green. They're just so bright that you can mix them from a bright yellow and a bright blue, but you wouldn't, because you don't need these colours really. When you're painting plants and nature, what you really need is a nice spring green, a nice kind of sappy felt green, and something nice and neutral. And for that, I choose Ionian green and iron green. So that's where me as a nature exclusive artist and Derwent mainly disagree, actually, is when it comes to the utilities of greens. Leaf green they've included, and I have as well, because that is a very useful colour. Mustard, I prefer tan. Then we've got baked earth, which I've included here. Willow, which I haven't included in favour of a burnt umber. Again, bark, I haven't included that in favour of a burnt umber or a sepia. And they've included charcoal grey, same as me. And then the ink black. And then they've got a antique white and their outliner pencil as well. So I haven't included a white because I find that the Inktense white I never ever use. I think there is a bit of a knack to it that I've never really developed, and I don't really think that you need a white. If I want to put a highlight over the top, what I'll tend to do is either find a gouache or I will go over with a highlighter pen. So a jelly roll or a white highlighter pen, and go over my highlights in that. That's kind of a matter of style. It might be that you want to play around with the Inktense white, but I personally don't bother. And I also don't use the outliner pencil really, and that's because I tend to use these fine liners instead. Let me know what you thought of this. Are there any other colours in the Inktense range that you really enjoy that I didn't include here? I'd love to have a discussion about that. So put that down in the comments below. Now, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you found it useful going through these colours. I just want to encourage you all to not go out and buy the biggest sets that you possibly can, because it can be really overwhelming having so many colours. And actually, you don't need too much to really start experimenting with these and starting to use and enjoy them.